3E Atlas was supposed to be over. The visitor came in, lit up our telescopes, triggered a wave of papers and conspiracy threads, and then slipped back into the dark. The headlines moved on. The trending tabs moved on. Even most of the public moved on. But the data didn't get it buried in fresh plots, late-time observations, and some frankly uncomfortable comparisons with other interstellar visitors is a simple, unsettling reality. 3. Atlas wasn't a one-time event. It was a piece of something that's still ongoing, not just out there in deep space, but right here inside our own solar system. Inside our observatories, and inside the way we now think about visitors from other stars. If that sounds dramatic, good. It should. Because once you see how the numbers fall together, it's very hard to go back to the old story of just a weird comet that dropped by once and left. Before we peel this apart, if you've been following this saga with me and you don't want to miss what happens if this pattern continues, make sure you're subscribed, drop a like, and stay with me till the end. Because by the time we're done, you won't be thinking of 3 Atlas as a separate event anymore, but as one beat in a much bigger rhythm that's still playing. Let's start by reminding ourselves what everyone thought was going to happen. The script for a normal comet is simple. It comes in from the outer dark. It warms up. It sheds gas and dust. It flares for a while, makes a beautiful tail. Then, as it moves away from the sun again, the energy drops. The jets shut down. The brightness falls off along a neat curve. You write your papers, archive your data, and move on. Even with all its weirdness. That's how most people quietly assumed 3 Atlas would behave. Sure, we'd argue about its origin, its dust, its weird tail, and antipatel, its tiny nucleus, acting like a giant, maybe even its dust shield. But once it passed perihelion and started outbound, the expectation underneath all of that was simple. Whatever it was, it would wind down. The story would close. That is not what happened. When the first round of post-perihelion data came in, something small but important broke that script. As the object receded and the geometry changed, astronomers kept taking light curves, measuring how bright 3 Atlas was over time. Those points are supposed to slide down a smooth, predictable ramp. Instead, they stalled. Yes, the comet got dimmer, but not at the rate it should have. Even correcting for distance and phase angle, the real measurements sat stubbornly above the fading model. Each new observation should have been a little lower than the last. They weren't. They ran high. They plateaued. At times, they even bumped. If that had happened once, you could blame it on bad weather, calibration issues, or some tricky geometry. But it kept happening. Different telescopes, different nights, different bands, same story. 3 Atlas refused to behave like a finished event. Then, as always with this object, the story got stranger when you looked closer. When the data were folded over its rotation period, that brightness didn't just look too high. It looked more structured. Early in the encounter, the light curve was chaotic. Multiple humps, jagged transitions, peaks arriving a little early or late. Like a heart that hadn't decided what rhythm it wanted yet. That chaos matched the idea of multiple vents flickering on and off across a stressed, tumbling nucleus. Later, as the post-perihelion data started to stack up, the shape of that curve changed. The main peak was still there, but between those main flashes, where you'd expect things to smooth out, as activity relaxed, new, smaller peaks settled in. 2 in particular started appearing over and over at the same phase of each rotation. What had been noisy and irregular hardened into a repeatable pattern. You don't have to be a comet specialist to understand what that means. You're watching the activity on the surface reorganize. Instead of a bunch of random cracks venting whenever they feel like it, you're seeing a smaller number of dominant regions settle into a consistent firing sequence. In plain language. Even as 3 Atlas moved away and should have been powering down, it was still changing. Not just in how much gas and dust it was throwing off, but in where that activity lived and how it rotated through sunlight. That's the first clue that we're not dealing with a simple flare-then-fade object. This thing has phases, it has chapters, and we reached the end of one chapter. Not the book, then we look at the pictures. If you stack the deep exposures from just before perihelion and compare them to the ones from weeks after, you're not just looking at a core that slowly shrinks into noise. You're looking at a coma and tail system that keeps reorganizing. Early on, you have the dramatic headline-grabbing structures. The main tail, the sunward-pointing antitail, the weird fans and jets, the veil of dust that looks suspiciously like a shield. You have the size-activity mismatch that makes everyone uncomfortable. You have all the ingredients of a one-off anomaly. Later on, after the hype dies down, you still have a story. The antitail doesn't vanish. Its shape evolves. The heavy 10-micron dust that held it up continues to stream behind the comet along its orbit, forming a trail that will stay in our solar system long after the nucleus is gone. The main tail shifts in width and curvature, reflecting changes in the jets feeding it. The inner coma, instead of simply shrinking, shows fresh arcs, faint shells, moving outward, each marking a recent pulse of activity from a different depth. When you put all of that together, what you're staring at is not the smoke from something that already happened. You're staring at something that is still happening. The nucleus is adapting. The jets are rebasing themselves on deeper layers. The dust architecture is growing into a long-term structure that planets will intersect for years, and the orbit solution, the actual path of 3E. Atlas through the suns, gravity is being tugged by that activity far into the outbound leg. Long after simple textbooks say the thrust should be negligible, and this is where the phrase, one event quietly dies. Because even if you stop the story right, they're just this one object. Just these data, it is clearly not a firework. It's a process. But that's not the only reason we have to retire. The idea that 3 Atlas was some isolated freak encounter. 2. See the bigger picture. You have to zoom out and put it next to its predecessors. The first, 2 Interstellar. Visitors we ever saw. First, we had Oumuamua, an object so small and faint, it barely showed up. With no obvious coma, no classic tail, and a shape and brightness variation that made astronomers invent words like cigar and pancake in the same sentence. The weirdest part, as it left, it accelerated slightly, gently, in a way that looked like outgassing, but without the gas. People argued loudly about what that meant. Exotic natural ice, hydrogen, nitrogen, fluffy snow, or something not natural. At all. Then we had 2I, Borisov. This one looked more like a normal comet, plenty of gas, dust, and a more familiar tail. It was almost a relief to most of the community. Here was proof, they said, that interstellar comets could be icy rubble flung out from other systems. Problem solved. And then 3 Atlas showed up and casually shredded that nice, clean narrative. From the moment it was detected. It was wrong in the way Oumuamua was wrong, but in a different direction. Too bright for its distance. Too active for its size. Destructured in its dust for a simple dirty snowball. Too erratic in its non-gravitational acceleration to be brushed aside as just another jet. The grain sizes, the dust veil, the anti-tail that needed heavy particles and a very specific optical depth to exist. The pulse-like light curves that looked like an engine inhaling and exhaling rather than a rock simply steaming. If Oumuamua was too little gas for the acceleration, 3 Atlas was too much acceleration for the size. One was a missing tail. The other was an overachieving one. What they have in common isn't their exact behavior. What they have in common is that neither of them fit the models people were trying to force them into. And when you line them up, when Ia to I3Ia pattern starts to scream from under the noise. The first interstellar object we ever saw was weird enough that some people publicly suggested alien tech. The second looked a bit more normal. The third came in and was weird again, but in a way that rhymed with the first. Non-gravitational accelerations, layered behavior, composition and dust that don't match the local comets we grew up studying. 3 objects, 3 anomalies, 3 data points. Yes, statistically tiny. But when the first 3 pieces of a puzzle all land outside your expectations, the problem might not be the pieces. The problem might be the picture you're trying to build. At this point, the idea that 3 Atlas was some isolated cosmic glitch starts to sound like wishful thinking. It joins Oumuamua and Borisov in a tiny but powerful club. Things from other stars that show us processes we haven't mapped yet. We thought of them as visitors. Random tourists passing through, once and disappearing. They look more like the visible tips of an ongoing exchange between star systems. The best analogy might be this. For most of human history, we thought the ocean was empty between continents. Then ships started crossing regularly, and suddenly, the world was full of routes, currents, and traffic that had always been there. We just weren't on the right shore to see them. 1I, 2I, and 3I are our first ships on the horizon. And 3I, Atlas specifically, is the one that left the most obvious wake. Because even if the nucleus itself has vanished into the background, what it left behind is still here, still ongoing, still shaping our environment. The dust it shed is now part of the solar system. That sounds poetic, but it's literal. Those 10-micron grains that held up the anti-tail don't vanish because the rock left. They follow the orbit 3I Atlas carved through our system. They spread, they interact with sunlight, solar, wind, planetary, gravity. Some get pushed into new paths. Some hang in coherent streams. The result is that the solar system now has a new set of structures inside it. Went invisible to the naked eye, but very real. Over the coming years, Earth will pass through those streams. Other planets will too. Our meteor detectors will pick up tiny flashes from grains that did not form here. Our infrared maps will see subtle enhancements in the dust glow along the track of an object that is no longer present. And long after nobody remembers the news cycles about that third interstellar comet, the physical consequences of its visit will still be happening in the sky. That alone kills the phrase, one-time event. You cannot call something one time if you're going to be driving through its exhaust trail for decades. But even that isn't the whole story. Because while the dust records a physical ongoing process, the data record an intellectual one. Every time a new light curve gets measured from an obscure, faint blob in the outer solar system, it's now being compared not just to local comets, but to this new class of interstellar weirdos we've been forced to acknowledge. Every time something shows a non-gravitational acceleration that doesn't match outgassing models, 3I Atlas is sitting in the back of the room as a reference. Every time an object shows an anatel or unusual dust sizes or strange activity far from the sun, it's not just a strange comet anymore. It's another one of those. The ongoing phenomenon here isn't just physical traffic between stars. It's our awakening to the idea that traffic exists at all. And that's before you even touch the question everybody secretly wants to ask, but hates saying out loud. What if some of this isn't natural? We have to be careful here. And you know why. It's easy to scream aliens at every mystery. It's lazy to say probe every time the math feels uncomfortable. But it's just as lazy to refuse to even consider the hypothesis when very specific, engineering-like coincidences pile up. 3I/Atlas forced people into that uncomfortable space. The grain sizes in its dust shield were not random. They fell in a range that was just right both to resist radiation pressure and to be lifted off the surface. The optical depth of the veil was not random. It landed near the value that hides a solid body without becoming completely opaque. The pulse nature of its light curve was not random. It fit a world where jets weren't just leaking, but stuttering. You can build natural explanations for all of that. You can build artificial explanations too. Both are logically possible. What matters for our topic today is this. Whether you believe 3I Atlas was a natural superactive comet or some kind of engineered object hiding behind its own dust, neither scenario is one and done. If it's natural, it belongs to a population of objects that are being launched out of their home systems all the time. We just caught one. There are more. If it's artificial, it belongs to something even stranger. Network, a fleet, or a debris field of technological artifacts moving between stars over very long timescales. In both cases, the implication is, the something ongoing is using interstellar space as a highway. 3I Atlas was just a car we happened to notice. So where does that leave us? Practically, it leaves us with astronomers rerunning statistics and realizing that 3 interstellar visitors in a handful of years is unlikely to be a fluke. It leaves us with dust models that now have to include not just local, asteroid, and comet debris, but foreign streams that pass through once and then keep going. It leaves us with mission concepts on whiteboards at NASA and ESA that assume for I5I and 6I are inevitably in, may be worth chasing with dedicated probes. And it leaves us with a set of radio and optical searches that, for the first time, are designed not just to catalog what's here, but to catch what briefly passes through. None of that looks like a field wrapping up a chapter and filing it away. It looks like the beginning of a new discipline, interstellar object science. And 3I Atlas, with its tiny nucleus and oversized behavior, is right in the middle of the syllabus. So when we say 3I Atlas wasn't a one-time event, we're talking about 3 different levels at once. On the physical level, its dust, gas, and gravity effects live on inside our solar system and will continue to intersect with us. On the observational level, its data continue to reshuffle our models, and it remains a live case study every time a new visitor appears. On the conceptual level, it forced us to admit that there is a continuous process, natural, artificial, or both, that sends objects from one star system into another. The visitor left. The story didn't. And here's the part that often gets overlooked, the timeline. We talk about 1I, 2I, and 3I as if they're separate, discrete events. They are in the sense that you can chart their individual paths. But in terms of how they affect us, they overlap. By the time Borisov was being analyzed, people were already referencing Oumuamua. By the time 3I Atlas arrived, its detection pipelines, follow-up strategies, and even some of the theoretical framework already existed because of the first 2. And now, as we point our surveys at the sky and sharpen our algorithms, the next interstellar visitor will be studied through a lens warped by all 3. That's not 3 dots on a line. That's a rampant ongoing rise in how often we detect these things, how clearly we see them, and how seriously we take them. Think about what that means. 10 years out. Right now, interstellar visitors are rare headlines. In a decade, if the models are right, they could be annual. In a few decades, with better telescopes and all-sky monitoring, they might be routine. We might have a catalog of dozens. We might see families of them. We might notice that some share similar inbound directions or speed distributions. At that point, we're not telling stories about the time a weird comet dropped by. We're telling stories about the traffic pattern of our local bubble in the galaxy. And when we look back at the early days of that field, 3i Atlas is going to sit there as the moment when we realized that something was still ongoing even after the bright coma faded. The punchline in all of this is almost too simple. The idea that 3i Atlas was a one-time event only works if you stop looking. Once you keep watching the dust, the orbit, the follow-on statistics, the missions being designed because of IT are not watching an event. You're watching the beginning of a new normal. And if that makes you feel small, or excited, or a little uneasy, that's appropriate. Because buried inside all the technical charts and careful language is a question that is not technical. All of interstellar space is busy if objects are constantly crossing between stars. Some natural, some maybe not. What does that say about our place in that network? Are we just another system being sprayed with leftovers? Are we being sampled, whether by rocks or by relics? Are we early in realizing this, or very late? 3i Atlas doesn't answer those questions, but it forces us to ask them. The visitor has passed. The wake is still here. And somewhere far out along its outbound path, a small, hyperactive, dust-strapped nucleus is still rotating, still cooling, still drifting away from us at tens of kilometers per second, carrying with it the record of our one brief moment of overlap. Maybe someday, something on board will write star with one noisy blue planet into a log. Maybe it won't. Maybe it's just a shard of a broken world. Too dumb to know we even exist. Either way, from our side, the effect is the same. We saw it, we measured it, we were changed by it. And now, we live in a solar system that has proof. It's dust and it's data that out there has ways of reaching in. So the next time you hear someone say, "Oh yeah, I remember that 3i thing, whatever happened with that?" you can tell them the truth. It's left, and that's when things really started. If you want to keep following that story with me through it's the next visitor, the next unexpected light curve, the next how is that even possible paper that drops at 2 in the morning, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think 3i Atlas was just a super weird natural comet in a much bigger, ongoing river of debris between stars? Or do you think it was part of something more deliberate, a relic, a probe, a fragment of someone else's technology drifting through? Either way, this wasn't a one-time event. Something's still ongoing, and we're just starting to notice.